All right, so we are live, and we're just waiting for things to share right now. So if anyone is joining the live at this moment, please take the time to share it with your friends, family members, anyone. Remember, this is the Progressive Party's town hall meeting, and we're having this every week. So you may be noticing that it's only two of us today. Unfortunately, Morgan, and we know Morgan is a fan favorite. Morgan is unable to join us, and Kelsey as well. So you have Nichelle and myself. And what we're going to be doing is recapping a bit of the last virtual political meeting and also taking your questions as usual. All right, so let's just get this billboard back up here, and then we'll come back and we'll jump straight into it. Great. So once again, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join us at another Progressive Party virtual town hall meeting. So we want you to take the time to share your comments, your questions with us, and we will be open and honest and answer anything that you throw at us. So Nichelle, last week, Tuesday was the first time that you presented at the virtual political meeting. How was that experience?
Um, I would want to say it was a bit nerve-wracking at first, but afterwards, once you got on the platform and you did your thing, it was pretty much easy going.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, and we know that a lot of the times persons when they come in to public speaking or that kind of arena, the first stab at it is not always a political meeting. So I can imagine, and a full studio setup at that. And let me take the time to thank Gael, the Caribbean, for allowing us the use of their studio. So we have developed a relationship with Gael, the Caribbean, where we are utilizing their studio, the Tony Hall studio that is in St. James, and thus far things have been really gracious. Now we are having another virtual political meeting this Tuesday from 8 to 9 p.m. and that will be broadcasted live on Gaia the Caribbean. Also, you can check out our social media accounts. So you're seeing us here on Facebook, on Twitter, you're seeing us in groups and on pages, and this is where you will continue to see us every Tuesday from 8 to 9 p.m. and every Sunday from 5 to 6 p.m. And we know these virtual town hall meetings, they are a bit more interactive. So this is where you get to pose your comments, and whether you're seeing us on YouTube or Twitter or on Facebook, you can pose your questions and your comments, and they will pop up, and we'll bring them up on the screen and take that moving forward. So, Nichelle, we spoke about the economy last virtual political meeting. If you want to recap or at least let us know some of the key points that you would have shared that you think we would want to jog person's memory.
So basically, I would have spoken about an adaptive, innovative, and remedy-based economy. And what we're trying to focus on is a lot of investment into research and development. One, because our country is very hard to diversify from oil and gas. And what usually happens when a country tries to diversify, you try to switch to an industry that would more or less be similar to your capabilities within the industry that you're now specialized in. But oil and gas is so highly specialized, it's hard to switch easily using your same resources. So we need a lot of investment in um, in research and development, because clearly we cannot go back to oil and gas because it's an ongoing issue where the prices are highly volatile, and it's it doesn't lend well to our planning and our budgeting. And what else? We also spoke about entrepreneurship and how important it was to a robust economy, where in Trinidad right now, it's so hard. There's so much bureaucracy associated with becoming an entrepreneur. And when you think about countries like these first world countries where you have entrepreneurial labs and just high investment into research and development, Trinidad has not reached there as yet. And you ask why? There's no logical reason as to why we can't be investing into entrepreneurship. And I also mentioned using entrepreneurship as a tool to basically drive social change. It's not just entrepreneurship for individual gain, it's also entrepreneurship to solve social problems. So, like sport entrepreneurship, you could be using sport entrepreneurship to foster like world-class athletes and just from the very beginning foster disciplined youth. And we tend to look at entrepreneurship strictly for business, but honestly, entrepreneurship could be used to drive social change. Um, what else we spoke about? The need to switch from our high dependence on renewable on non-renewable energy, and let's invest. We are surrounded by water. Let's invest in some hydrothermal energy. That's where tropical island. What? Why aren't there so much more um, solar panel farms? And it's you tend to ask these questions over and over. Why aren't we doing these things? And it's all at the basis of a corrupt system. Everyone has these bright ideas going into office as the government. They produce these fancy manifestos, yet we don't see the plans actually being actualized or realized. And it's all on the basis of a corrupt system. We have the plans already, but we can't execute them because of corruption. And that has to be the most heartbreaking thing, because you have all these resources at your hand, and the only thing that's keeping you back is a corrupt system. And we have to go beyond that to, if Trinidad is to become a first world country, and we have so much potential, it is unreal. And Trinidad and Tobago is for an oil producing country. We're stuck, and we're not supposed to be at this stage. We should have been using all of the money that we have been making in the past to invest into a future that we can be proud of. But all we did was thief all the money that came in from the past governments, and that is unfair to our future generations. It's as though they have no regard for us, the upcoming millennials who are now supposed to run the country. And when we finally get there, when they finally have to let go of office by force, we now will be stuck in this position where it's just like, what are we doing? We have no money. We don't know how to go forward. And right now, when we have the resources, it is now that we need to invest in the research and development to take us beyond oil and gas. And if we choose to ignore it, Trinidad and Tobago, we are not going to get anywhere. And a lot of people, as I mentioned before, see entrepreneurship as some people going to set up a business. It's not like that. Entrepreneurship is all about innovation, fostering new ideas. Like, you could have crime fighting firms. Like, these things are not, entrepreneurship is not limited to just commodities or consumer goods. Entrepreneurship could drive social change. And it's the same thing with like sports entrepreneurship that I talked about before. It's really important for us to see entrepreneurship working hand in hand with solving our social problems. What else we can talk about? We have being remedy based. We have so many economic shocks in our economy. The latest one being the novel coronavirus. And we are just not prepared to, because of how fickle our oil and gas industry is, we haven't been prepared to produce a budget that would, an adaptable budget per se, that would reflect what we need in the future, or like a basic economic recovery plan. We haven't found a solid one as yet. The government has not been able to produce a solid one as yet. And yeah, so we need to move beyond oil and gas going into the future.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks for that, Michelle. Let me jump in here. But before I contribute, let me just put this up here to remind persons that you can like our constituency pages on Facebook. So as you can see in the instructions there, search Progressive Party dash and the name of your constituency. We have been able to establish 41 pages across Facebook, each for the various constituencies across Trinidad and Tobago. So we want you all to find the constituency page that is representative of your constituency and start contributing there. And we're going to start building those out. You would also see over time that we'll be developing our legs, and our legs are considered the local electoral groups. So how you hear that you have the party groups in various constituencies, that would be our legs for the Progressive Party. So once again, you can go on Facebook, type in Progressive Party dash the name of your constituency, and be sure to like that page. You'll also see we have some hashtags there. Hashtag the new normal, which is our slogan going into the election. You'll also see hashtag guiding flame. Guiding flame, of course, is our symbol, the guiding flame. Hashtag progress 2020 and hashtag progressives TT. So we want you to be sure to utilize those pages and those hashtags to keep in touch with everything that we're doing. Now, I see that we're having some questions here. One is from Lyndon Mack, and he's asking, what is the debt ratio of our country presently? And if voted into office, how would you fix that problem? The last time that I checked, I noticed that the debt to GDP ratio was roughly about 60-something%. And I remember the Minister of Finance saying that globally, the standard, I think, that you would want to stay below is, I think it would be 67% or so, something around that figure, if I am correct. However, with coronavirus and its impact on us, I think that ballooned to somewhere around 70-something. So by all indicators, once that is correct, we are above the threshold that is considered a good GDP, debt to GDP ratio. And I would anticipate that with falling oil and gas prices and an increased demand for social services by the state, which would equate to having to spend more money, that would in fact continue to drive our debt to GDP ratio. And we're also seeing that the government right now is taking on a lot of debt in the form of loans and these things. And while they may say that these loans are necessary to keep the economy going, to ensure that persons are able to survive during this coronavirus pandemic, we have to think about the long-term effects. So back to Lyndon's question, if we were in office, what would we do to fix that problem? We would immediately put an end to that whole notion of borrowing to service our debt and to take care of a lot of these social grants. We have to introduce public-private partnerships with the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act 2015. It actually makes provisions for that public-private partnerships. But the Ministry of Finance has a duty and a responsibility to draft the policy on public-private partnerships. And just from the title, you can understand what it means. Public-private partnerships, it's where the government and the private sector can collaborate on various projects. So a certain percentage of the funding may come from the government, while the other percentage comes from the private sector. So those kinds of relationships would be very beneficial to the state as a whole. When you think about the risks associated with it for the private sector, it's not that high of a risk because the government can guarantee that the money will be available. If it was a loan, the government can guarantee that, and so forth. So we have to lobby that the Ministry of Finance produces that policy on public-private partnerships, and that it is something that we start to develop. It would see us spending less time having to take out loans and ensuring that we are able to become self-sufficient to a very large extent. So that is but one way that we can tackle that issue of reducing the GDP. And I also did some research, and I saw, and once these things are correct, because we know sometimes the validity of the statistics that we find in Trinidad and Tobago, they're very outdated and probably not applicable. But I believe it was in 2004 that we really started developing a public debt. Prior to that, we had no real public debt. Everything we were able to pay for because we had the resources at our disposal. But it was from 2004 onward that we started to increase or to establish public debt. And it has us in this situation right now where it's roughly about 70-something%. And just for persons to understand how we look at debt to GDP ratio. Now, GDP is the gross domestic product. And what that is we quantify all of the goods and services, the business transactions that take place in the country, and that is given a figure. So I think it is probably $100 and something billion that we anticipate is usually traded every year, all right, in Trinidad and Tobago. Each year you will have a different GDP accordingly. But with that figure of $100 and something odd billion, when we look at debt to GDP, it means that whatever our debt figure, it's a percentage of that. So if it's 70% of that $100 and something billion, clearly we are in a tough situation where it may be us owing, I think, 70-something, 90-something billion dollars. All right, so that's how that works out. Correct, right, Michelle?
Correct.
So, and this is all public information, guys. What we want to really drive home to you all is that you have to do research as well. It is very easy in many cases to find this information. You don't have to go to university. You don't have to have a master's and all of these things. Public information is there, but a lot of the time we don't take the opportunity to go searching for it. We will admit, though, that there is not enough information out there. This is why we want to see the Central Statistical Office really morph into that statistical institute that the government is proposing. What that will do is give the CSO, now the Statistical Institute, the teeth to, say, compel a ministry or a state department to provide it with information. And once it does not do that, certain sanctions or repercussions will ensue. So we really want to see that kind of legislation come forth. Of course, we have to look at budgets, and we have to look at a lot of this information because of the nature of the business. We're in politics. We have to be able to not only critique a lot of the plans presented by the government, but to offer our own solutions as well. Yeah. Let me see what other questions we have here. Right, so I'm seeing Dilworth mentioning private and public sector collaboration has worked well worldwide and is in fact a way to propel Trinbago into the 21st century and beyond. And I think a good example, it may not be the best example, but is an example nonetheless. What would have happened or what would have taken place with Sandals or the Sandals project, because it would have been a collaboration where it's a public-private partnership. The government would have been providing the land and so forth. The Sandals brand, they would have provided the plans for that and also would have been responsible for managing that facility moving forward. So we had to look at that situation. It may have been extremely beneficial for Trinidad and Tobago, but of course, it is a matter of how that whole process was handled moving forward. If we had handled that situation better, we would have been able to have a public-private partnership work in Trinidad and Tobago, and it may have been a model moving forward. So we lost out on an opportunity there, but I'm quite confident that with a progressive government, you would have way more such opportunities. Yeah. So I'm seeing here another one from Dilworth. Public sector debt seems to be take a huge chunk out of revenue. Has research been done or planned to alleviate or offset some of the debt without jeopardizing public service delivery and public sector jobs? Also, any thoughts on how union representation and its seemingly ironclad grip on preventing firing in the public sector can be addressed with a view to making it easier to punish non-performance by public sector employees? That's a lot to unpack there. Nichelle, you want to take a stab at it, and I'll come in.
So we could take the first half where he talks about taking a huge chunk. Well, how basically do we balance that act where we have debts to pay, yet we have to cater to social services? And basically, the aim is to invest in infrastructure using that same debt that you have to invest in infrastructure that would eventually generate revenue. And it's just investing in things that will generate revenue in the future that will allow you to maintain your social policies and your social grants, etc., while at the same time being able to pay off your previous debt. And what I think our past governments, they're pretty short-sighted, and they just think liquidity. They always boast about the liquidity in the present, but pay no attention to the high solvency rates in the future. And they focus too much on spending on social grants. It's not that spending on social grants is not important, but you have to equally invest in infrastructure and other revenue generating projects that would eventually see us using money from that investment to pay off our debts and continue with our social programs. And what it is that even things like just investing in highways, like and road maintenance, all these things are so important for business to function smoothly. And it's just a lot of kickback in terms of that. We don't have the infrastructure, or we haven't invested enough in infrastructure and other projects that would generate enough revenue to help us sustain that level of spending and repaying our debts in the future. So a huge chunk of the revenue. Also thoughts on how union representation and its seemingly ironclad grip on preventing firing in the public sector can be addressed with a view to making it easier to punish non-performance by the public sector. And this is another point where the government has neglected these industrial relations. They tend to ignore their side of contracts with public employees. Let's take the healthcare fiasco that is happening now. These nurses and these healthcare workers, they're paying 2020 tax rates on 2015 salaries, 2016 salaries, and that is unfair. I feel what they need to do is establish better relationships and take their time to honor their end of contracts, because without that that close relationship with the government and the workers, there'll be no way to move forward. And so just basically maintaining good industrial relations. And I was having a chat recently with someone who's well versed in industrial relations, and he was saying there's usually a discord between the vision that you would have with the government and then employees. And no one takes the time to come together to formulate that strategy. They usually tend to work against each other, and there's no cooperation in that aspect. So that makes it even harder to move forward in with respect to industrial relations.
Now, one of the things when we look at the public sector that we have to tackle is the inertia that exists in the public sector. And I think that the Public Service Commission is starved of resources. Now, we don't usually, and I know that the Attorney General usually tries to make a point of this, but we don't know who the people, the commissioners of the public sector, of the Public Service Commission are. That information isn't just available. You don't see their photos anywhere. It's not that they have their own dedicated website and you can go there and find out information. So that has to change. We have to make the Public Service Commission a bit more within reach, so to say. So that is a big problem. We also tend to put persons on the Public Service Commission. Now, how the Public Service Commissioners are appointed, it's by the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So he or she, in his or her discretion, chooses who these Public Service Commissioners are, and they are appointed. And it's usually older persons. We don't see younger persons being appointed to the PSC. And I think therein lies an issue, because if you have younger persons on board, they may be able to present a certain perspective and a difference of opinion, something that we can look forward to insofar as keeping up with the times, so to say. And this is where we really and truly have to ensure that the Public Service Commission is moving a lot smoother, so that when issues arise in the public sector, they can tackle it almost immediately. That is something that right now does not exist. And then we have, when we look at labor relations and conciliation, that is within the Ministry of Labor. All right. So it's not to say that it is directly connected to the Public Service Commission. That is within that department. And usually the Minister of Labor is the one who has jurisdiction or responsibility when it comes to these kinds of issues. All right. But the minister, her or himself, is not the one who actually sits and goes over the matter and resolves it and so forth. We have delegated responsibility or delegated duties. So you would have someone within that unit who is probably the head of the conciliation unit who is responsible for that matter. And then it's just passed on to the minister and signed off. And that's how the public service tends to work, because when you look at tongue and country planning, for instance, the minister is supposed to be the one who is signing off on the plans and these things, but the minister doesn't have time for that. And right now, the Minister of Planning and Development is the Prime Minister, and he himself made it a point that he does not see these things. These things don't pass his desk. So you can ask him, well, why wasn't this approved in whatever area? And he will have no knowledge of it whatsoever. So we need to really revamp the public sector in such a way that we can hold people accountable, that the persons who are literally at the helm of these organizations are also there figuratively. All right. So we have to look at these scenarios and deal with that. Now, in terms of unionization, I think that we have to put a lot more information out into the public domain. Yeah. So unions themselves have to come into a bit of modern. Their approaches have to be extremely modern. We can no longer feel as though it's okay just to go protest and to make noise, because I remember having to do an interview with the chief personnel officer for my thesis, looking at alternative dispute resolution in a litigious society. And I remember she giving me the stories of union members coming into the union members coming into negotiations and stamping on the table and making noise, and it's this whole big parade and all of these things. And I think those no longer have a space in our negotiations, or should not occupy a space in our negotiations anymore. We have to have civil negotiations taking place where people can deal with their issues without all the media attention and the hoorah and so forth. So there are a number of things that need to be cleaned up there, but I think we cannot give unions at the same time a 6 for a 9, because we saw the tripartite body that was set up where it was government, labor, and private sector coming together to have this panel, not seeing that coming to any kind of real fruition. I know Labour pulled out immediately after that happened because of some falling out. So we really, I think, have to treat Labour with a bit more respect, and only then we can demand more of them, I think. Now, I'm seeing a question here. With corruption being the root cause of previous governments not being able to diversify the economy, how does the Progressive Party plan to deal with the corruption in the governance of our nation? Now, first and foremost, it starts with the regime going into office, or the political party. So I can tell you, at the level of the Progressive Party, we have taken on a program where we are doing extensive background checks for the persons who come into the fold. So to be even a member, from the time that you apply for membership, we have our membership committee going through your application, checking out your social media, doing research, trying to figure out who is this individual coming into the party. And I can only tell you that it would be more rigorous once you're a candidate. So, and this would be, we have built into our system a situation where once you are going to be appointed to a state board, as a senator, any of these things, we are going to have rigorous internal processes to deal with these things. So it starts with us. It starts with the party making sure that there are checks and balances on the membership before they can be appointed to any such position. Once we get in there, though, what I can tell you is that we want to tackle two things in particular, because we have the infrastructure. We have the infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago to deal with corruption, but we're not maximizing on those things, and we're not giving certain bodies the kinds of teeth necessary. So let's look at the Integrity Commission, for instance. We've heard over years, of persons complaining, prime ministers, members of parliament complaining about the Integrity Commission, and the Integrity Commissioners themselves complaining that they do not have the teeth. So if someone is not filing their annual statement of income and these different things with the Integrity Commission, the most the Integrity Commission can do is name and shame. You can't be removed from your position for failure to supply the information. So those kinds of things need to be dealt with. Also, the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, that's something I will continue to lobby for, because I sat on that board previously, so I understand the importance of that legislation. And it's really disappointing to see that 5 years after that bill was passed in Parliament, we have still not operationalized fully the act. So those would be some of the things that we treat with. We would ensure that there are the right penalties to go along with the right offenses, and those things have to really and truly be out in the forefront, and we have to show that we can go through with it. So it's not our intention to just arrest everyone. We want people to fall in line, and we want people to do the right thing. So there will be a period in time where, when these things come on board, you have to get your act together. Probably chances may be given to a certain extent, but after that grace period, you do the crime, you do the time, yeah, so to say. Now, I'm seeing here some more questions. We have quite a bit of questions, Nichelle. All right, let me go back up to this one before we continue. So does agricultural initiatives form a part of the Progressive Party's diversification package? Oh, you know what? Let me show this one time so that persons can see. I don't know how clear it would be. All right. But that essentially is our, let me see if I can get this up too. Right. So these are policy positions here. And I know it may be very difficult for you to read, but two of the things that I wanted to point out in particular, because we are on the topic of it. So we are looking at an adaptive, innovative, and remedy-based economy that embraces current and future entrepreneurs, employers, and employees, and is shaped by best-in-practice industrial relations, laws, and policies. So that speaks to especially the question that when it comes to unions and so forth, we want to ensure that we have the best-in-practice labor standards and policies that does not necessarily favor the employee over the employer or vice versa. It has to be a leveled playing field. So we want to remind you that you can go onto our website, progressives.tt, and under commitments, you can find all of these 16 policy positions so that you can take the time to read them and understand them fully. The other one that I would want to just jump on here real quick before we move on. So we are looking at the issue of agriculture. So we want to ensure that, let me just get this right. Number 7, a sustainable agriculture sector which offers high quality produce for the domestic and foreign markets, which is equitably supported by infrastructural development, technology, incentives, and access to current and emerging markets. So that, in essence, would answer the question there on whether or not agriculture forms a part of our policies. Let me see if I can, right, this is it here. So does agricultural initiatives form a part of the Progressive Party's diversification package? We believe that agriculture has to play an integral role in the diversification of our economy. And we can see from COVID-19 and its effects on Trinidad and Tobago that if we were to be cut off from the rest of the world, we will not be able to access a lot of the produce that we enjoy right now. I know that for a moment there were even shortages in various groceries and in markets and so forth. So we have to be able to tackle that. We have to reduce our food import bill, but more importantly, and that will be as a result of ensuring that we are able to grow our own food. And the government has to ensure that we have the right incentives, but more than that, we have to make the sector attractive from the standpoint of a young person. Because when we look at agriculture, it's not even just simply about getting dirty, so to say. Agriculture has taken on so many facets where there is technology in agriculture. When you think about genetic modified or organisms and all of these things. Now, of course, there are persons who are not really in agreement with those things, but we have to have a balancing act. How can we ensure that our produce can withstand a lot of the harsh conditions that we may be exposed to and so forth? So those are some of the things that we have to tackle. We're seeing another question here, Michelle. A very long-standing issue with all political parties for the last 58 years has been corruption within office/administration. If elected, what will your party do to instill confidence in the public that corruption will come to an end across the board? And what will you do to prosecute any wrongdoings in the last 58 years? Calder Hart et al. Now, I addressed, I guess, the first part of the question where I spoke about it starts with us as a party, our internal procedures and policies to ensure that we put forward candidates who are not corrupt, whose character we can really stand by and so forth. But what can we do to prosecute any wrongdoers in the last 58 years? Now, this is, I think, a good point or a good opportunity to address something. The government does not prosecute anyone. All right. How our justice system works is that, first of all, a case has to be built, and it usually takes place at the level of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. So information has to be directed to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, unless in certain cases, just as with the Office of Procurement Regulation, at that office, you are able to build a case after going through all the investigations and so forth and pass over that directly to the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecutions. So there are other institutions that I think have that reach as well, but for the most part, a case is built, passed on to the TTPS, or information is passed on to the TTPS, and a case is built. So we have to look at it from that standpoint. I know a lot of governments come in office or go on the election pulpit, so to say, and say we're going to lock up this one, that one, and the other. You do not have the authority and the power to lock up anyone. That's why we have the three branches of the government. So you have the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So it is within the realm of the judiciary where those matters are to be heard. All right. So I just want to put that out there. But we will ensure that the TTPS, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and all other relevant offices are properly staffed, are properly resourced, because that is a huge problem that we're seeing right now. We hear time and time again where the DPP is complaining about a lack of funding and a lack of staff. So if we want to really see justice come to light in a real way, we have to be able to resource these offices. Another one being the Forensic Sciences Center. I've spoken on this issue ad nauseum, where we can't reasonably expect that we have one forensic sciences center, not even satellite forensic sciences centers. A murder, every time there is foul play involved in a person's death, when autopsies have to be done, it's in St. James. So imagine that family from Cedros having to travel all the way to St. James to forth. We need to see. Of course, we are pushing strong for crime prevention, but detection is the reason why we have so many unsolved cases, because of the evidence gathering. I understand that it takes I think roughly, all right, and ballistics, of course, in a crime, and they recover spent shells and so forth, and to be able to do all of that processing, it takes on average 6 years, and that is not a good standard for our country. So those are things that we want to deal with. Nichelle, I'm seeing another question here. I don't know if you want to... oh, go ahead.
When you're, oh no, I was just gonna add to that, the corruption question as well. We have not embarked on digitizing our public sectors yet, and that lends basically a non-digitized public system is going to be so much easier to facilitate corruption in a system where you don't invest highly in technology. It's so much easier to get rid of a paper trail than to get rid of a digital trail. And you have to ask yourself, years and years have gone by where these different apps are in place. They're so easy to come across, to just invest in and digitize the public system. But it doesn't happen because it would take away from the so-called power that these people would have when dealing with paper trails. And that also comes into the investment in technology. It's so important to invest in technology to hamper corruption per se. And we have a next one up here. When you're finished with those questions, what are your plans for expanding our manufacturing? And so this all goes back to investment and innovation. It's basically you're competing. And it also ties into the agriculture sector as well. We have to link the primary and the secondary sector. We could boast all about how great our cocoa is. If we don't invest in the infrastructure needed to market that cocoa on a global level, we are never gonna be on the world market, recognized on the world market for our cocoa. And it all comes back to research and development as well. Why are we not investing and diversifying away from oil and gas? And we place so much emphasis on manufacturing with respect to oil and gas that we tend to neglect our other potential commodities that we could be exporting on the global markets. And so basically, the answer to that question would be invest more into research and development, and also into different ways of manufacturing. You move away from that labor system and mechanize it to the point where a lot of the manufacturing is done through technology rather than assembly line work manned by humans. And yeah, so it's basically research and investment, investing in technology, and that push to go from being labor intensive to more capital intensive manufacturing. And yeah.
Yeah, and also look at manufacturing. I think we have to really come up with, well, yeah, the research, development, the technology, all of that goes hand in hand, where we need to really stimulate our local population to the point where they are willing to step out of the box and come up with ideas. Because I would love to see Trinidad and Tobago get to a point where we are world renowned for our innovation. So whether it becomes innovation in the field of manufacturing, so we're looking at agriculture or whatnot, and manufacturing, of course, runs the full gamut of, let's say, agriculture to engineering, to an extent where you are developing tools, mechanical items, and so forth. So we have to look at manufacturing in a very holistic standpoint. And I think this is where we will see innovation really thrive. And we have to ask ourselves the questions. What is UE doing? What is UTT doing? What is SBCS doing? Now, of course, for them to be focused on research and development, there has to be the resources available, of course. So this is where the government to really make more investments into research and development and really putting out things. I've said it time and time again. Trinidad and Tobago should have been one of those countries searching for a cure or developing a cure for coronavirus. It is within our capacity, I think, when we think about how many doctors we're tuning out, when we think about annually how many students are graduating from medicine programs and so forth, it can work. We have to put these people into productive practices where it's not just, okay, I'm doing this to get a job, but because you can have doctors who they don't care. Well, not don't care. Let me don't put it like that. They are not looking to simply become a doctor and work in the public sector or the private sector for the rest of their life, but they much rather want to get involved in diagnoses. So they can go in there, find cures for certain things and so forth. So I want to see a lot more of that. And I think that generally the Progressive Party, that is the direction that we'll be pushing when it comes to those things. All right. Oh, but I'm seeing here as well, this follows from the other question. It is clear we are best placed for exporting. I can see us doing well with auto manufacturing. So same thing that I said, manufacturing should not just be limited to agriculture. All right, and I'm seeing additional to that, and assembly. I do think that we can have assembly lines and those things set up in Trinidad and Tobago. There are many people who can be brought into productive work. I know that the other political party is talking about 50,000 jobs. We can create way more than 50,000 jobs. And of course, it's not just like that. But this is where we have to get people understanding coding. We need to teach coding from primary school all the way up, because coding is the language of the future. In fact, it's the language of now, if you think about it. coding is responsible for our apps, for website development, for all of these things. So if Trinidad and Tobago is serious about becoming a technology-driven economy and society, then we have to prepare our people to take advantage of that. Gone should be the days where we have to import persons into Trinidad and Tobago to fulfill many of the roles and functions that our same people here can take up. Yeah. But I'm seeing a question here: government systems, how do realign? Not too sure what that what the question is. So Andrew, feel free to probably clarify, and we will tackle that. So I'm seeing here from Mark, one of the biggest issues with labor relations on both sides of the table is clear guidelines for accountability, proper checks and balances, and a functional red tape system that actually works. Do you want to tackle that at all, Michelle? I guess I can just jump in here then. Well, of course, Mark. So one of the biggest issues, yes, in labor relations, it goes on both sides, and that's why we're saying too that it's not simply that we can blame the unions, but there has to be a meeting of the minds are coming together, dealing with it from the standpoint where we want a win-win situation. We want all persons involved to walk away from that negotiating table feeling accomplished, feeling as though those that they're fighting on behalf of would be pleased. And it's not about how much I could get and the most I can get and so forth. The clear guidelines are very important. We tend to lack putting guidelines and developing our own guidelines here in Trinidad and Tobago. I can tell you that in the fire service, we don't have our own codes and guidelines where those things are concerned. And that is because we are right now simply copying and pasting or referring to international standards. But why can't we develop our own local standards that are in conformity with international standards? But of course, we would ensure that everything that we're putting into those locally developed guidelines are geared to what our local context. So I think it's not going to be hard to develop a lot of these things for guidelines for accountability, checks and balances and so forth, and that is what we have to really take the time to invest in and so forth. Okay. What is the Progressive Party's ideas for water without a schedule if modernizing infrastructure? Of course, and we would all know that this was the reason, well, it's alleged that this was the reason that the then Minister of Public Utilities, Robert Lehunt, would have resigned because of a squabble within Cabinet over water and the ability of the government to provide water for all on a more regular basis and so forth. And I think that it was being said that it would cost $1 billion or upward of $1 billion. But that $1 billion investment is going to benefit so many and impact on so many lives. And that's what we are earning money for, to ensure that our infrastructure, to ensure that people have the basic amenities. So electricity, water, a proper road network, public transportation, and so forth. These are the things that you want to spend money on. And I think that if the reports are correct, then Minister Lehunt, now Mr. Lehunt, would have been completely within his right to resign over this issue, because we need to be spending the public's money in ways that will benefit the most amount of people. I know that he also spoke about to put LED lights across, to replace all the bulbs across Trinidad and Tobago LED. So those street lights, it will cost, I think, also like $1 billion or something. But think about the savings in terms of energy over an extended period of time, because those LED lights have a way longer time, and I think they were also solar powered. So those are the things that we need to invest in. In 2020, no citizen of Trinidad and Tobago should be saying that they are without water or that they're still only getting water 2 days a week. That should not be the case. Too much money has passed through this country, and a lot of it through corruption. So that is something that we would want to ensure. I know that we're winding up here. I'm seeing one other question. Let me see before we take that question if there are any others. No. So this is our latest question here, again from Sherry. A new government will need to concentrate on matters of healing the wrongs done over the years. What budget will be allocated to get justice? And will taxpayers be able to withstand a long battle? Because uh, those who were wrong will not go without a fight. Who will spearhead finding proof? As we well know, it has been destroyed and paper trails, many involved with staff as well. That is a very important point, and I think that it'll probably be a good question for us to end on in terms of taking the questions and so forth. So as I had mentioned before, we need to have the proper systems operationalized to ensure that detection is possible. We have to have people of high moral character and standing in positions to hold these persons accountable. But one of the things that we envision in the Progressive Party, I'm not sure how many persons are aware of these things called Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. So I spoke on this once before, where the commission into the 1990 coup and the commission into the Hindu Credit Union, those to an extent were supposed to be fact-finding commissions or truth and reconciliation commissions. Well, the latter not really a reconciliation commission, but we have to have these public bodies or commissions whose work and responsibility it is
I'm not too sure if Nikolai is frozen, but just going back to his point, you have to basically ensure that those systems that, oh, okay, you're back. I don't know. It's a lot of technicalities happening here. I'm not even sure if he was speaking. I was speaking.
Yeah, I think that it's cool. But yeah, so I was saying that we need to have those kinds of bodies or institutions set up to engage in these fact-finding missions, because we have to really come we have to face the fact that there has been wrongdoing. It cannot continue to be just we're throwing allegations around and so forth. We have to resource the TTPS. We have to resource the DPP's office, Forensic Sciences Center. We have to have proper checks and balances within institutions to ensure that the persons who are holding the positions are above board and can do what is necessary. All right. So those, I think, are very important issues for us to tackle as a society, and we have to ensure that we have the right budget for that. I know that a lot of the times when we think about budgeting, we think about the tangible things that we could probably just feel and see and so forth. But a lot of what goes on in the background, it's not properly resourced. And we have to be able to allocate resources to ensure that things are able to function. So while you're sleeping, things are churning, wheels are churning, and those are happening. So it's not about ribbon cutting ceremonies and we paving this road and we're having a big function for it and stuff. We need to ensure that justice is served. I know that right now the government is expanding the courts and so forth, but it really has to be, even with all of that, we have to create the right environment for people to come forth with evidence. Whistleblowing legislation, the whistleblower legislation has to come into office. And if it is that the issue right now for that not being passed is the issue with the media and whether or not the media can in fact be able to report well, then we probably just need to take out that and get the whistleblower aspect of it passed in Parliament, and we can come back to deal with that media aspect. Because every day in Trinidad and Tobago, people are coming into contact with information that will turn possibly the public service on its head. They need to be given the confidence that if they offer information, that information is not going to be to their detriment. All right, because we've heard stories where people have had to flee who fled Trinidad and Tobago because they've passed on information, and the people who they were reporting on got wind, and then they started receiving death threats and all of that. So all of those issues have to be tackled. Of course, there are going to be, let's just be honest with ourselves, there are going to be people who are going to get off because probably the statute of limitations has passed, or there is not evidence available because it has been destroyed. And to be very honest, there's very little we can do about that. We have to think about building that right environment as we move forward to ensure that the mistakes of our past and our history does not repeat itself. So I think that's the best way that we can look at it. All right, so I guess we could just probably do this last question and then wrap. Are you contesting all 41 seats? If not, how many seats are you tackling, and what is the size of your membership? So we are always maintaining that it is our intention to contest all 41. That is solely dependent on people's ability to fill out nomination, to apply for membership, fill out nomination, make themselves available. We don't have 41 people just waiting to be processed, or 41 people that we have in mind. You, the members of the public, the good men of Trinidad and Tobago, and then the good women of Trinidad and Tobago who feel as though they have what it takes, you need to step forward. That's the only way that change is going to happen, the only way progress is going to happen. The membership right now, I think it is roughly about 100 persons, but we have a lot that are being processed at the moment. And with that being said, I want to encourage all of you to go to our website, progressives.tt, and apply for membership. Membership is only $80 per year. That $80 helps us with our political campaign. That $80 helps us to get the message far and wide across Trinidad and Tobago. That $80 pays for the platforms that we have here using the technology. So a progressive, a political party, and Michelle, she's the chief financial officer, she can tell you that a political party does not just run on please and thank yous. It runs on actual money. And where we may not have at this moment big financiers, and it is not our objective to just simply have big financiers, because big financiers come with big expectations. Yeah. So we have to depend on you, the everyday man and woman who wants to see better for Trinidad and Tobago. You need to support our journey. You need to come out there, and it may not be just money, in-kind support, allowing us certain spaces. You may want to donate a computer to us. You may want to donate paying for one of the subscriptions of the services that we use every month. Those things go a long way. So the Progressive Party can only grow from strength to strength if you are willing to support us in the ways that we need it. And support can also even look like just simply sharing our posts. You understand? But of course, if you want to donate, the information is below there. Visit our website, progressives.tt, and under the donation aspect, you can feel free to donate to our party using your Visa or MasterCard. And you can also make a direct deposit to our bank account, and the information is under there. We have an RBC bank account. You can see the number there. The RBC Gulf City branch is our home branch. Feel free to donate. We take in anything, $20, $100, whatever it is. It all adds up. Yeah. So Nichelle, I can probably give you the final words to wrap us up this afternoon.
Yeah. So I just want to thank everyone for coming out, and even coming out from what you were just saying. We're talking citizen demanded government. You currency for change. You put your money where you want to see change happening. And as Nikolai said, it doesn't always have to be money. Just lend us your support and interact with our lives. Ask us questions, make suggestions. We appreciate all types of support. And with that, thank you for watching, and we would see you guys next week.